In August 1945, the world changed in 12 days. Most people know about the bombs. Almost nobody knows what happened between them, and the decisions made in those 12 days are still shaping wars that have not ended yet. Stay with this. Because the truth of how the Second World War actually ended is not what you were taught, and once you understand it, the modern world will never look the same again. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. A single bomb destroys a city in seconds. 70,000 people die before they understand what is happening. The world holds its breath. Washington expects Japan to surrender immediately. Japan does not surrender. 2 days pass. 3 days pass. Tokyo is silent. American commanders are confused. Intelligence officers are confused. The White House is confused. What is Japan waiting for? The answer is not what anyone in Washington expects. And it is about to change everything. In Tokyo on the morning of August 8th, the Supreme War Council is meeting. The generals are not discussing the bomb. They are watching something else. Something moving toward them from the north. Something that terrifies them far more than any weapon America has used so far. 1.5 million Soviet soldiers, massed on the Manchurian border, ready, and Japan has no answer for them. To understand why the Soviets matter more than the bomb, you need to understand what Japan was actually planning. The military commanders in Tokyo were not simply refusing to surrender out of pride or fanaticism. They had a strategy. It was called Ketsu-Go. The plan was to make an American invasion of Japan so catastrophically expensive in American lives that Washington would choose a negotiated peace over a complete conquest. The battle for Okinawa had just ended. It had cost America 12,000 dead in 82 days. American military planners projected that an invasion of the Japanese home islands could cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties. The Japanese military believed American democracy could not absorb that cost. They believed public pressure would force Washington to negotiate. It was a calculated bet, not irrational, and it had one critical requirement. The Soviet Union had to stay out of the war. Japan and the Soviet Union had a neutrality pact. Japan had been using Soviet diplomatic channels for months to explore a negotiated peace. The peace faction in Tokyo was hoping Moscow would broker a settlement that preserved the emperor. The military faction was betting that Soviet neutrality would prevent a two-front war. Both strategies, the peace plan and the fighting strategy, both depended entirely on the Soviets staying neutral. Then at midnight on August 9th, Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov summoned the Japanese ambassador. The meeting lasted 7 minutes. The Soviet Union was declaring war on Japan, effective immediately. Before the ambassador could respond, Soviet forces were already crossing the border. 1.5 million soldiers, 15,000 tanks and artillery pieces, the largest military force ever assembled in Asia, moving at a speed that Japanese commanders had not believed was possible. The Kwantung Army, Japan's most powerful overseas force, the force Tokyo had been counting on as a strategic reserve, began collapsing within hours, not days. Hours. In the same moment the second atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. But in the meeting rooms of Tokyo, it is the Soviet advance that produces visible panic, because the Soviets are not just winning, they are moving toward the Japanese home islands from the north. They are moving toward Korea. They are moving toward Manchuria that Japan has controlled for 14 years. Every hour they advance, Japan loses more of what it was fighting to protect. The peace faction in Tokyo watches the Soviet advance and understands something with sudden and devastating clarity. Every diplomatic option they had is gone. The Soviets were their mediator. The Soviets were their last channel to a negotiated exit, and now the Soviets are an enemy advancing at 40 kilometers a day. One man understands this faster than anyone else in the room. Historian Tsuyoshi Hasegawa, whose research on this period spent years in Japanese and Soviet archives, has documented what the Supreme War Council records actually show. In the deliberations of August 9th, the Soviet declaration is discussed with a specific and measurable urgency that the atomic bomb does not produce in the same way. The bomb is catastrophic, but Japan has been absorbing catastrophic destruction for months. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 killed more people in a single night than either atomic bomb. Japanese cities have been burning all summer. What the military faction had no answer for was not destruction. It was a two-front war that destroyed the Ketsu-Go strategy completely. Now understand what happens next, because this is the part that almost no Western account tells correctly. The argument in Tokyo on August 9th and August 10th is not whether to surrender. It is about one specific condition, one non-negotiable demand: the preservation of the emperor, the Kokutai, the imperial system that defined what Japan was. The Allies had demanded unconditional surrender. In Tokyo, unconditional surrender was understood to potentially mean the elimination of the emperor and the imperial institution. The faction seeking peace would not accept that, would rather fight to extinction than accept that. The deadlock is so complete that it reaches the emperor himself. Hirohito speaks. It is an extraordinary moment. The emperor of Japan, whose voice had never been broadcast to the Japanese people in the history of his reign, agrees to surrender on one condition: the imperial institution must be preserved. The Allies accept this condition, not explicitly, through deliberately ambiguous diplomatic language that allows both sides to claim they got what they needed. Japan surrenders on August 15th. Hirohito records a speech. It is broadcast on radio the following morning. Millions of Japanese people hear the emperor's voice for the first time in their lives. Many do not understand what he is saying. The language is formal and archaic, but the meaning spreads within minutes. The war is over. In Manchuria, Soviet forces do not stop. The surrender announcement does not halt the Soviet advance immediately. Soviet forces continue moving. They seize Manchuria. They enter Korea from the north. And on August 18, Soviet forces begin the assault on the Kuril Islands. The southernmost 4 islands of the Kuril chain, which Japan calls the Northern Territories, are seized in the final days of combat. Japan considers these islands inherent Japanese territory. They have never been returned. No formal peace treaty between Japan and Russia has ever been signed. In 2024, nearly 80 years after those August days, Japan and Russia are technically not at peace. 2 major powers, no peace treaty, because of territory seized in the final week of a war that ended in 1945. Now we go to Korea. August 10th, 1945. Washington. A small office. 2 American military officers, Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel. They have 30 minutes. They have a National Geographic map. They need to decide where American and Soviet forces will divide Korea for the purpose of accepting Japanese surrenders. The 38th parallel catches Bonesteel's eye. It divides the peninsula roughly in half. It keeps Seoul in the American zone. He draws the line. The Soviets agree to it without negotiation. Nobody in that room believes the line is permanent. Everybody in that room understands it is temporary. Within 5 years, it becomes the boundary between 2 separate states. Within 5 years, it becomes the line across which 3 million people will die in a war that never formally ends. The Korean Armistice of 1953 stops the fighting. It does not end the war. North and South Korea are technically still at war today. The most heavily armed border in the world sits on a line drawn in 30 minutes with a National Geographic map in August 1945. Now China. The Soviet advance into Manchuria produces a specific military consequence that shapes the most significant political transformation in Asia in the 20th century. As Soviet forces withdraw from Manchuria in the months following the surrender, they facilitate the transfer of enormous quantities of captured Japanese military equipment to the forces of Mao Zedong. Tanks, artillery, small arms. The equipment changes the military balance of the Chinese Civil War. Communist forces take Manchuria, use it as a base, and advance progressively against nationalist forces that are better equipped by the Americans but worse led and worse motivated. In 1949, Mao Zedong stands in Beijing and proclaims the People's Republic of China. The nationalist government retreats to Taiwan, and the confrontation that results between the People's Republic and the Republic of China on Taiwan, backed by the United States, becomes the single most dangerous unresolved territorial dispute in the current world. 2 nuclear-capable powers with security commitments on opposite sides of a strait, war gamed by military planners on 3 continents. Potentially the most consequential military confrontation of the 21st century. Its origin is in the Soviet advance into Manchuria in August 1945, and the equipment transferred as Soviet forces withdrew, in the line drawn on a National Geographic map at midnight in a Washington office. Here is what should stop you completely. Every major conflict in Asia since 1945 connects to those 12 days. The Korean War, the Chinese Civil War, the Taiwan confrontation, the Japan-Russia dispute, the North Korean nuclear program, which exists specifically because Pyongyang has watched what happened to countries that surrendered their strategic deterrence and has drawn its own conclusions. All of it structurally connected to 12 days in August 1945. The men who made those decisions are dead. The decisions are not. They are the living architecture of the most strategically significant region in the world. The Kuril Islands are still Russian. Korea is still divided. Taiwan is still contested, and the line drawn in 30 minutes on a National Geographic map in August 1945 is still the most dangerous border on Earth. History did not end in August 1945. It did not even pause. It accelerated into the world you are living in right now, where the consequences of 12 days 8 decades ago are still determining whether the 21st century ends in cooperation or catastrophe. If the decisions made in rooms you were never invited into, decisions that are still defining your world today, are what you came here for, subscribe. Because the next episode goes deeper. The documents are partially declassified, and what they reveal about the gap between what was decided and what was told to the public is more disturbing than anything in this one.